All right, everybody, good evening. It is Tuesday night. We all know what that means. It's 7 o'clock Central. It is time for another Conversations with Commodores, and I am so pumped up for my guest this evening. I've got number 44, Pooh, Ed Parrish. How you doing tonight, Ed? So good to see you, my friend.
Hey, fantastic. I'm doing fantastic. It's so good to be on with you and finally get a chance to talk with you.
It is. We've been emailing a little bit, and I know Ed's watched several of the conversations because we've had a bunch of his teammates over the years on here. And I always love to find out, and I know the answer, of where my guests each week currently reside. Many still are in the state of Tennessee. You didn't get that far away, but where do you call home?
Well, I'm just the next state over to the west is in Arkansas. Actually, I live in what they call in this region, Northwest Arkansas, but it consists of Fayetteville and Rogers, Arkansas, where I live directly, and Bentonville, Arkansas, where it's the home of Walmart, actually. So I'm over in the northwest corner of the state of Arkansas, as far as you can go, almost into Oklahoma, and as far north as you can go, almost into Missouri.
Well, I was going to say, you're kind of in that triangle. You got Woo Pig Suey, you got the Sooners, and you got Mizzou. I know you got to get tired of that, Ed. You must, in your years in HR, you must have worked with countless people from one of those universities.
Absolutely. But you know what? I just wear my black and gold and be proud.
Absolutely. That's the only way you can do it.
That's right. Every now and then I run into an actual Vanderbilt fan or a Vanderbilt player, and here in this part of the country. So we have an opportunity to stop and chat and talk about our commonalities.
Very good. Very good. Well, Ed, I know you landed on campus in the fall of '74 coming out of Dyersburg. Tell us about Dyersburg, Tennessee. What kind of growing up was it in Dyersburg for you?
Hey, that's my hometown, and I claim it because that's where I got my roots. And I grew up, it was a small town, I guess, at the time I grew up there in the 60s, 70s. It's about a town of the size of 13,000, 14,000 people, not very much bigger than that today. Actually, I grew up in a family of 8. 6 kids and mom and dad, and 5 boys. I was kind of packed there in the middle, and one sister there.
That sister must have been treated like the princess. She had to have been with all those brothers, must have been protected. She probably didn't go on a date forever.
Well, she had our number. I know that with Dad.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, did everybody play sports growing up, or were you the standout?
Well, I had an older brother who played some. I had a younger brother who was a couple of years behind me, played some in high school. And but as far as moving beyond high school, and I was the only one.
All right. Now, Dyersburg High School was the home of Ed Parrish. What kind of program did you guys have? What was your team nickname? What were you known for from the high school standpoint?
Hey, you know what? I didn't have to trade out colors when I went to Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
We were black and gold, and with the Dyersburg Golden Trojans.
Nice.
And yeah, and I guess our team, Dyersburg had I guess for a long period of time, football team hardly won many games. And they changed coaches when I was a sophomore, going into high school, went into a brand new high school, newly built. And the first year that coach was there, his name was Bobby Newby. He was from the Nashville area. And I think that the team went 5-6 or something to that effect. But after that, we were 10-1. Our junior year and my senior year, I believe we were the same, and ended up like number 5 in the state of Tennessee.
And were you in the backfield, or did you just play multiple positions?
Yes. I was in the backfield. We actually ran the wishbone,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was the fullback
Uh-huh.
for the wishbone. My junior year, I ran about 1,600 yards and about 23 touchdowns, I believe was the stats. And
From
then
from the fullback position and the veer offense. That's
yeah,
incredible. That's awesome.
yeah, and I mean, of course, the beer was pretty big and during the '70s. All the
Oh, sure.
big teams like Alabama and most of the teams ran that offense.
And then by this point, or were you now getting on the recruiting circuit where coaches and schools finding you, or were you kind of a hidden gem in a town of 13,000 and folks hadn't discovered you just quite yet?
Well, actually, my junior year, I ended up, um, I guess, being recruited quite heavily just during my junior year. Letters were pouring in from everywhere. They were coming to my school, coming to my home. And my coach, I had a coach that kept me level headed. And he talked to me about the process of recruiting. And as a matter of fact, some of the letters I don't think I ever received because I think he
I
kept
was,
them from me.
Ed, I was just getting ready to say, from my standpoint, I grew up in Dothan, Alabama, near Tallahassee, Florida. And my coach's philosophy was, one, until you're a senior, I'm not letting you talk to the coaches and see the letters. And even then, the letters would come to the school and he would hold them. He would keep them and not give them to you until after the football season was over. Now, I didn't think that that was all fair, but it was his program. So every coach I know is a little bit different, but with your coach's guidance, how did you narrow it down to a few schools? How did you ultimately discover or declare that Vanderbilt was going to be your school?
Well, and be totally honest, I never knew anything about Vanderbilt.
Mhm.
I was there in a small town. We watched Kentucky on TV because that's the channel we could get. We watched Memphis State on TV because
Right.
that's the channel that we could get during the '70s or
Mhm.
'60s. We watched the large schools from California at the time with USC, UCLA, and Notre Dame, as well as Alabama and Georgia and those schools. That's what I knew about. But then I ended up having my first visit with Mississippi State.
Mhm.
And that was my first college visit. And they were playing Vanderbilt.
Wow.
And the score was 44 to nothing, I believe. And of course, and the cowbells and all those things
Yeah.
that's part of their process. But the next school I visited was Vanderbilt.
Mhm.
And I had my conversation with the coach there at the time, Coach Steve Sloan,
Mhm.
Coach Bill Parcells, and was there as part of that program, and with my parents there with me, and just sitting down talking with them was night and day difference than my conversations and my experience at Mississippi State.
How so? Wow.
Well, I did not like I didn't feel good about the atmosphere there at Mississippi State.
Sure.
The atmosphere simply meaning the afterlife. Didn't it's the coach and the coaches there at the time. I just didn't have a good feel about going there to that school and playing football there.
Well, Ed, Starkville now doesn't have much of a away from football life, so to speak. I can't imagine what it was like in 1973, 74 in Starkville. But apparently, Coach Sloan and maybe Parcells or whoever else you interviewed with, and I wonder how many people out there know that Coach Parcells coached for a year at Vanderbilt. Side note. But Ed, they had to have impressed you in some way, or maybe your parents and through your conversation. But I'm always curious. You must have really been impressed with what you heard, with what you saw. But what was that really just said, that's where I want to go?
Well, it was the actual conversation
Mhm.
and the care that they took and talking with myself and my parents.
Mhm.
And what they told me was the first number one thing that we care about is your education. That was the conversation. I remember that to this day. And he said, football comes second. But we like what we see and what you've done in the sport. And we think that you can come and help us with our rebuilding program. We don't promise anything. You have to work hard as usual. But the most important thing is that we check up on you. You don't miss classes. And if you do, that's a problem with us. But it was just that conversation and the tone of the conversation. It's almost like my dad was talking to me. I tell you, after I left there, I had made up my mind that that's where I wanted to go.
Wow, that really set a tone, really set a precedent for you. Now, I'm really going to press you here. Was that conversation in Magoogan? Was it in the stadium? Do you happen to remember where it took place?
I believe it was, I can't remember the name of where the cafeteria was because there was a number of players around at the time with parents. So they were kind of speed dating.
Oh yeah, that's funny. Now, Ed, coming out of Dyersburg, were there other student athletes, either your year or a few years ahead of you, who were playing on the collegiate level that maybe you were able to lean on a little bit, or friends of yours that you knew playing in college?
Well, yes. There was one that I admired, and his name was Danny Jeffries. And Danny, I would watch him as a younger kid, maybe 4 years behind Danny or 5, and he ran like they were 100-yard dashes at the time, like a 9, 8, 100-yard dash, one of the top in the state. And I would watch him on the field, and he would just zoom past everyone. But he wore the number 44, and that's what caught my eye with the number 44. So I wanted to wear that number just because I wanted to be like him, be able to run like him. But Danny ended up attending University of Tennessee. He played there with the Big Orange. And I had a chance to see him play one college game against Ole Miss. And he was running punt returns back, and he was still the same Danny, was running past players with his speed. But I was so impressed with him that I wanted his jersey in junior high. I had his jersey number. In college, high school, I had his jersey number. And then in college, I finally received that number 44 that
Wow.
I was impressed with.
Was he at Dyersburg when you were maybe in junior high?
Yes.
And did you guys get to know each other as time went on?
Well, I actually played with one of his brothers that was my age. And I did meet Danny in Nashville. He ended up living in Nashville, and had an opportunity to meet him and tell him my story about my admiration.
Oh, wow. You know, sometimes growing up, the heroes who were so much older than us, and we had it that way. It was that way for me too. All aspiring middle school and junior high and elementary ball players, they see Friday nights, they see the numbers, they know who they are. But a lot of times you never get to meet them. Or maybe you meet them many, many years later. And I always want to know, and this is my question for you. Do you want to keep your sports heroes at a distance and remember them the way that you saw them, or in your mind's eye, that's who they were? Or do you want to meet them with the chance that it might disappoint you after you meet them? And it doesn't sound like you were ever disappointed. I'm not implying that, but I'm always curious if you really, did you want to meet him after a certain period of time, knowing, playing with his brother? Was that important to you?
Yes, it was. It was important to me because I wanted an opportunity to tell him how I felt about what he had accomplished.
Wow.
And as a result of that, it impressed me so that I wanted to follow in his footsteps. And not many players from Dyersburg actually were college bound. But he was, and that's the one I cast my eye on. Here's how I met him though.
Uh-huh.
I happened to be in Nashville's airport, and I was traveling for my job. And on a Friday evening, I normally travel back on the Friday. I'm waiting for my luggage, and I see this guy, and I see his profile, and I'm saying in my mind, I think that's him. So I got bold enough to go over and ask him what his name was, and then I told him my story.
That's incredible. That's even more unique than the story I thought you were going to say, is that you and his brother went to lunch and invited him to come, like it was prearranged, but just happened chance. How cool.
Yeah.
Wow. Now,
Pretty cool.
how come you didn't end up in Knoxville? And I'm glad you didn't, but how come you didn't continue the journey of following him going to Knoxville? Was that an option for you?
No, I'd say no, it wasn't an option because I made my decision very early in the process.
Mhm.
I think I visited 3 schools.
Mhm.
First one was Mississippi State.
Mhm.
The second one, my coach actually drove me to Murray State, Kentucky,
Oh,
because there was a player there from Dyersburg who was playing quarterback there at the time.
okay.
And that was not appealing to me. And the next school was Vanderbilt, as I mentioned. And I made my decision. I was determined that that's where I wanted to go to school. They talked about a rebuilding program, and I thought I could be a part of it. And I wanted that opportunity to try.
Well, with not really knowing much about the football program, as you said earlier, at what point in the process, Ed, did you look at the roster, watch some films, get to know who was on the team? And what I mean by that, who was playing your position? And did you have a chance to maybe unseat that guy? What was the racial profile of the roster at that time? Because I'm sure those had to have been some factors in addition to playing time and academics, as you said, and maybe proximity from your hometown to Nashville. I assume all those things may have been factors for you and your parents.
Well, I'll say it this way. I was not concerned about who was in front of me. I knew that I had a very strong work ethic. I was always a team player, and I was prepared to do whatever the team wanted me to do. I had the thoughts of the coach in my mind that if I worked hard, that if I performed, then I would get an opportunity to play. No promises. I did look at the roster. I actually visited a couple of games there. I did look at the roster. I did see the players, but I was just excited to be part of the program.
What was the difference when you're watching those games as a high school senior? I don't know if you're in the stands or sidelines, with the size of the crowds versus maybe what you were used to playing in front of during a regular season at Dyersburg, which I'm sure were considerably smaller.
Right. On the visits, well, first of all, Mississippi State, they had a packed crowd. And all the cowbells, I was sitting right there in the midst of all the student section. So that was pretty interesting because I've never been in a crowd as large, and they were playing Vanderbilt. And then the next visit to Vanderbilt, yes, the crowd wasn't as large, but it was just as impressive. I was on the sideline, and David Culley actually was the recruiter that I kind of followed around. And he was, very impressive as well.
And he's continuing. I don't mean to interrupt you, but he's continuing to impress. Absolutely. Now being the Texans head coach, having a tough season, but hopefully he's learning a lot and doing us proud. That's for sure.
Yeah, but I was impressed with him and his tutelage, I guess, about the school, about expectations, and about his experience as well.
And ultimately, when you came in the fall of '74, who were some of your other I'll call them signing mates, folks who came in your class?
Wow. let me start back a month or so prior to coming there.
Of course.
Had the opportunity to play in the Tennessee State All-Star game.
Mhm.
And I didn't know what to expect. Obviously, I was there in Middle Tennessee at Murfreesboro, I believe. And a number of the players that were that played advantage that I was joining at the Tennessee State All-Star game also were joining Vanderbilt at the same time as freshmen. And we had James Thrillkill, we had Dennis Harris, we had Kimmy Weaver, I believe Floyd Hughes, and Andy Rutledge, just Mike Birdsong, I believe, just a number, Larry Utley, who was a lineman for us, but a number of those players were partners, I guess, during the time that we played the East-West Tennessee All-Star game.
I didn't appreciate those awesome names that you just mentioned as being part of your signing class. That's some serious athletic talent right there. I know you had to have been excited once you got to meet those guys. What was that like at the All-Star game, knowing that all you guys were going to be coming in a month or whatever it was together?
Well, it was pretty exciting because, you're there for a week.
Mhm.
And the other exciting things you're thinking ahead that in a couple of weeks, you're going to be starting your new journey with collegiate program.
Mhm.
But here's my interesting story about the All-Star game. So as we walked the campus that week, back and forth from practice to the campus, to the cafeteria, and we got a chance to build relationships and to know each other. And in addition to that, the news media was there. The Nashville Tennessean, the Banner, I think it's at the time, and the Memphis papers and the Eastern papers, and they would actually interview all of the players as they were coming from their practices.
Mhm.
I never got interviewed. I'm standing there with all the players. I'm the smallest one out there, and they skipped over me every time. All 5 days, 7 days, 5 days that we were there.
What was that about?
Well, they probably didn't know that I was a player. I was so small, I guess. That's the only thing I can think of.
Oh, wow.
But I say that to say this, but that lit a fire on the inside of me. Because all the other players was much bigger. Remember, I was 5'9", about 160 pounds, 165 pounds maybe. Dennis Harrison was 6'9",
Yeah.
and Kimmy Weaver 6'4", James Thrillkill 6'6", and I'm around all of these players. So I understood that. But the end result of this conversation is that I ended up winning the most valuable player for the All-Star game on the offensive side.
And did you get interviewed after the game?
No.
Crazy. My first question back to them was, where y'all been all week?
That's right.
Wow, that's what a motivating factor. Now, you have that great experience. I assume it culminated to be a great experience. You're getting to meet your future teammates. Now you're coming to fall camp, and you're no longer the big fish in the little pond in Dyersburg. You've gotten a taste of what the next level is like when you were at that all-star camp. But now everybody was a big fish in a little pond coming out of high school. And you've got some serious competition. And I realize you didn't care who was ahead of you. You were confident as an athlete. But at what point, whether it was that camp or maybe when camp broke and the season started, at what point during your freshman season did you get your, I'm going to call them your sea legs? You're starting to understand the offense. You're starting to get an idea of what's expected of you and how fast the game is and things like that.
First day, my experience was that they gave us a program over the summer for conditioning. And I worked that program every day. I didn't know that you needed to rest your muscles a little bit on some days. But I worked that program every day because I was so determined that this is what I wanted to do, and I was going to be successful at it. And so the very first day we had conditioning and different times, 2-mile runs with a minute in between each mile. And some made it and some didn't. And I was determined that I was going to be in the best condition that possibly could be in, and was not going to fall behind the program at the time.
Ed, were you the kind of athlete who trained by themselves and that's the way you wanted it? Or did you have either teammates or maybe your brothers pushing you or your sister pushing you along? How did you get through that summer of workouts?
Well, it was pretty much by myself in my local high school. Back in the late 60s, early 70s, you didn't see a lot of the players actually working out on weights strenuously. I always did. I started as a very young kid with my older brother, trying to keep up with him. So I can say that he was a motivator in the strengthening part. But every day I was there at that school or on a track, just trying to better my performance.
And it paid off when you reported to camp.
Absolutely.
Like.
That's why I couldn't gain weight. I was only 160 pounds.
Wow. And at first they had you working out as a running back or a defensive back before they moved you to your permanent position. Tell us a little bit about that transition.
Well, I came in as a defensive back, and I stayed there in that position probably through the two-a-day process. And as they were putting the program together, now all of this is new to me now because I did not understand the protocol for putting depth charts together and all those types of things, because I've always been just the star performer. Or
Yeah, you didn't have to worry about depth charts. You knew where you were.
But now here's my story talking about the depth chart. After during 2 days, they began to formulate the depth chart. And one day we came into the dressing room and everyone had a different color jersey. There were red and blue and yellow and green, I believe, were those colors. And I was wondering, why do we have so many different color jerseys? I found out that my red jersey that I had from the defense was for the scout team.
How did that hit you?
Well, not very good. That because I was just learning and I'm trying to understand what the organizational thought process and philosophies, but I learned quickly what that meant.
And how long did you stay on the scout team that season?
Just through 2 days, and after the 2-day process, and then there was a change.
Well, let's talk about the change.
Yeah.
Because the season is upon us, and the first game in late August or early September is, that date doesn't change, and it's hot, and it's typically going to be a good program you're playing. Were you getting some of that nervous energy, seeing that first game was only 10 days out, 6 days out, game week, whatever it was? What kind of mindset, I guess, you're trying to get off the scout team, you're trying to get into the 1-2 depth chart, so you're going to play. You're 18, I assume, at this time. School is just starting. You got everything coming together. It's one thing to play collegiate sports, but to be a starter or a contributor as an 18-year-old freshman in the SEC and dealing with your academic load, that's a lot on a kid. It may not seem like it now, but back then, it's a lot. Yeah. So how did you deal with all that? How did the transition work for you?
Well, let me tell you about the transition, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How that actually happened.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was in my heart of hearts, I was not satisfied being on defense because I was an offensive minded person.
Mhm.
I played defense in high school because you didn't have enough players. You played every
They
position.
needed you.
But I had thought about it and thought about it. I was wanting to ask the coach if I could move to the offensive side. And when I got up enough courage on the day that I was going to ask him, and one of the managers or the trainers came in and said, the coach wants to see you. So I go upstairs
Which coach wanted to see you?
in McGugan Center, Coach George McIntyre, who was my defensive back coach.
Mhm.
And I walk into his office. There said Coach McIntyre and Coach Art Zelensnik. We call him Coach Z because nobody could enunciate his name. And so they told me that they wanted to transition me over to the offense. And the reason for doing that is that I was placed on every special teams that there was.
Mhm.
Punt team,
Mhm.
kickoff team, punt receiving team, kickoff receiving team, field goal, all of those special teams. I was on those teams. And it said, and we think that you could better fit on the offensive side of the ball. They placed me in the third string position behind Lonnie Sadler and Adolph Groves.
And are you just thinking when you're walking into that meeting, did you have any idea what it was about? Did the trainer tip you off at all?
No idea. And I walked away just floored because it was on my mind so much. I prayed over it. I was frightened just to go up and talk with the coach about it. But when I walked in that office and I walked out of there, it was just a load off of my plate, I guess.
I'm envisioning later that day at practice, you get your gear, you go out, and you probably at first went to the defensive backfield side of the field. Like, wait a minute, what am I doing? You show up in the offensive backfield, and they're like, Ed, what you doing over here? What was that? Because you're going from being the hitter. Sometimes now you're the hittee unless you're in that fullback position. So you were probably still on cloud nine, knowing that now you're in the position that you're really hoping to do to
Well,
play.
first of all, I had to begin to understand the place.
Yeah, well, there was that.
Yeah, I understand the place. So I'm sitting there and I'm observing and watching.
Mhm.
And after the first team and the second team had gone in, dismissed, they kept the freshmen and some of the other scout teamers out. And they put us in position and to run plays. They ran me about 10, 12 plays straight. I guess they wanted to see what
Oh,
I could do.
yeah.
And that was just a great experience just to have the football back in my hands again.
I bet. Now, how close to the first game was this?
Probably a couple of weeks to the first game.
So really middle of camp, first part of camp before you got into game week. I want to pause where we are right there and ask you, had school started at this point? And what did you, once school did start, how long did it take you to learn that balance of academics, athletics, and sometimes sleeping whenever you could? That's a transition that's tough for freshmen sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Sleeping wasn't a problem because I was always an early riser and I wanted all my classes early.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did. But the balance trick was understanding how to study.
Yeah.
And that was the difference. There was a difference between what I knew and how I studied. I was always a good student in high school and what I needed to do in college.
Yeah.
And so I had to learn during that. So that was somewhat frightening at the very beginning, because one of the things I never wanted to do was to be a failure at that part of my
Well,
life.
Ed, some student athletes, regardless of their sport, they never figure out that component.
Yeah.
So they don't stick around very long. And I'm always very impressed with the student athletes at Vanderbilt who graduate either on time, and I'll say 4 years, the traditional time period, or some take a 5th year, some squeeze in graduate school. It's pretty amazing what the mind can do and what you can accomplish once you get it trained and you stay disciplined. And
Yes.
that's key. And it sounds like your childhood, you were a disciplined kid, or maybe the way your family was, and that served you well at Vanderbilt. But going back to the football component, how long did it take to learn the playbook? And when did you first get some playing time, if you did, during your freshman year? Which, for guys who didn't know, the fall of '74, the season turned out to be a pretty special season for Commodores.
Yeah. I played in every game except for the 2 where I was hurt.
Mm-hmm.
But the first game was against UT Chattanooga
Mm-hmm.
at Vanderbilt Stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I received my first touch of the football, my first experience, college experience, receiving kickoffs and being the kickoff return man. And as well as on the kickoff team, there was 2 of us, one named Ken Pittman and myself.
Mm-hmm.
We were what they call our kamikaze guys.
Mm-hmm.
Going first down the field, breaking up the wedge, trying
Mm-hmm.
to make that tackle behind the 20-yard line.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our goal was for Coach Sloan and Coach Parcell.
Well, do you remember, was your very first play in college, did you receive the kickoff or were you covering the kickoff?
I believe we were covering the kickoff the first play,
Mm-hmm.
but the next one is I was receiving a kickoff
Mm-hmm.
and almost ran it all the way back. One player left. It was the kicker. I hate to say it, it was the kicker.
The kicker. You probably remember his name and number and thought about him for years. Wow.
It's
Wow.
about a 49, almost 50-yard return.
Well, guys, if you're just joining us, or if you catch us later on the YouTube on replay, I'm talking with number 44, Ed Parrish, sometimes known as Pooh, sometimes known as Tankhead, however you knew him to be athletic, disciplined, and a hard worker. Ed, what did you enjoy about playing for Vanderbilt, particularly that freshman year? What gave you the most joy?
Being a part of the team, feeling that I made a contribution, and just the camaraderie, just of being in an atmosphere that was a winning atmosphere. And what I really enjoyed was how the coaches led the team. I tell you, when you're playing under Coach Sloan, I think he was just about 30 years old at the time.
He was one of the youngest coaches in the country that year. That's right.
He was. He'd only been there this is his 2nd year there at the university. And Coach Parcells, I just thought he was a crazy guy. Crazy in the sense that he got those the players to do the best that they could do and be the best that they could be. When they stepped on the field, we were well prepared. We went over the place over and over and over again. So you didn't think about your assignment. You just went out and you had to perform.
You quit thinking, you just did.
You just did it.
And little did you know back then, it wouldn't be that much later that Coach Parcells will be a Super Bowl winning coach.
Absolutely.
In the NFL. Incredible. Ed, tell us a little bit about off the field. What was it like being a student at Vanderbilt in the mid-'70s? Many different former student athletes describe a little bit different approaches, or not approaches, experiences that either the professors really did not like the fact that they had football players or athletes in their classes. And so some of the athletes didn't wear the team issued sweats and garb. They tried to blend in. Others proudly were very happy to be in class, and the professors really liked that. What was your experience like being a football player, 74, 5, 6, that time period on campus?
Well, my personal experience is that I was more focused on succeeding. And I think you mentioned earlier the balance that you needed to make it through. And once I learned what that balance was, I was able to make it through fairly well. The environment, I was not concerned about the environment at all. I had a strong character. I always had a strong character, and I was more focused on just what did I need to do to succeed in the environment.
You know, I was reading, there's a great book, and I don't have it here to show, but there's a great book that was put out several years ago about the history of Vanderbilt University and the campus and the students and sports and all that. And I know in 74 and 75, there were protests on campus about trying to get us out of Vietnam, out of the war. And I didn't know if that impacted the athletes at all, if any of the athletes took place in any of the protests. Were you familiar, or do you remember those protests being? Because I don't know how big they were. I don't know if they were impactful to the regular student body or not, or if that was an impression that you even had at that time.
Well, I can't remember the athletes actually getting involved. Maybe there were a few that could have, but I was not aware of that. I'll tell you what really made the experience at Vanderbilt great was the fraternity of the athletes. You almost had a built-in fraternity there just with your teammates.
Yeah.
Now, if I look outside of that circle, the other students that were maybe minorities may not have felt that same type of may not have that same type of experience. They may have felt a little bit more alienated, just simply because they didn't have that type of surrounding. Because there were not very many African-American students or minority students on the campus at that time. But when I think about the actual football team and the basketball team, I believe there were 22 African-American athletes that actually joined the team at my freshman year.
Oh.
And then the basketball team, there were several more. And so you had a feeling of belonging just simply because you had that built-in fraternity. But I can't say that the other non-athletes had the same experience.
Did you, during your off times, everybody blows off steam differently? Going to a pool hall, whatever, fraternity parties, whatever. Did you guys go visit other campuses in town? Did you have some favorite hangouts? Statute of limitations is long expired, so you can share whatever you want, Ed. It's just between me and you. But I'm always curious about, I know what you did regimented with the sport, and how many hours a week and all of that. That's commonality, doesn't matter when you played. But where'd you go to have fun? Where'd you get away from campus? What kind of fun stuff did you get into?
Well, I'm really going to be a dull guy on this one. I did have a car on campus.
You were a popular dude on the team then, I'm sure.
I was a pretty popular guy, yeah. But it was more going to the local parks when we had a chance to get away, and as guys, having fun. Met girls on the campus because that's the normal tradition, and you just get away and from the campus just to have some fun in the parks. But I was not one that, maybe downtown, what does downtown Nashville look like? Because we'd never been down there before, from a small town. So that was fascinating to me. But those were the types of things that I got involved in just with the people that I hung around with.
Sure.
So they pretty much like-minded as well.
Where did you live your last 3 years while you were on the team and in school? Were you in Carmichael? Were you in the different dorms?
Well, I think I was in Carmichael too, on the 5th floor.
There you go.
Yeah. And so remember that well, but I understand now that Carmichaels are no longer
gone.
in existence, aren't they?
All 4 of them are gone. They're being replaced by these, and I may describe this incorrectly. It's kind of mini campuses, mini campuses within the larger campus. And I think it's like, I don't know, Dwayne, if you're watching, you can maybe describe it better, but I think it's a self-enclosed environments, each part of the campus. And I don't know exactly how it works. I just know the towers are gone. These monstrous new buildings and structures are being put up as we speak. And I don't know if you've been to campus in a while, but it really, other than where the stadiums sit, most everything has turned over in the last 40 years. It's incredible.
Well, when I make my visit to Nashville, I'll have to come by and see the new look there on the campus.
Ed, we've got a few more minutes here. I want you to take us to getting closer to the bowl game your freshman year. Do you remember any specific games or plays or just the general vibe of the team as you guys plowed through that season and got bowl eligible?
I tell you, I think the game that I remember was Florida game.
Okay.
I believe it was that same year. And the reason why it's so memorable to me is because Florida was ranked high in the polls. And they came to Vanderbilt.
They were ranked 8th.
8th in the polls.
You had just lost to number 4, Alabama, 23-10.
That's right.
Beaten Chattanooga, beaten WMI.
Yes.
Lose a pretty close one to Bama. And then Florida was in October, the first game in October.
And we won 13 to
24-10.
24-10.
Yeah.
And the reason why that was so memorable is such a big game playing a high-ranked team.
Mm-hmm.
But our fathers, the players' fathers, were invited to the campus, and they shadowed the players throughout the pregame, the warm-ups. And my dad was with me, who hadn't got to see me play college football live. And he was there with me the entire time. And we walked through the pregame on the field, in the locker room, watching us get dressed. And here's I guess the part I have to laugh at is that we go in and we get taped up, taping the ankles, taping the knees. Of course, that's what I needed. And I had a bum shoulder, taping the shoulder. So when I got finished, I jumped off the table. My dad looked at me with these strange eyes. He said, are you playing today? So, he'd never seen that before.
Yeah.
But we were preparing for the game, but he had that experience to walk out on the field with his son's jersey on. And then the end result is that we won the ball game. And it was such a great feel to see such a great atmosphere in the stadium and to win that high-powered game.
I've never heard of that kind of experience for the dads pregame. How cool of an experience for both of y'all, for both the dads and the players. Yeah. That was very cool. But as we all know, that season ended up being a bowl game, Peach Bowl in Atlanta against Texas Tech.
Yeah.
But some of the wins that year, you beat Ole Miss a few weeks later. You beat Army, pretty big. Beat Tulane and Louisville. And then the last 2 games of the year were what? They were ties.
Yeah.
You tied the Orange and then you tied Texas Tech. And did you get, from your offensive position, did you get carries in the games, or were you mainly as a blocker during that freshman year?
I got some carries because I was actually playing tailback there. So I got in some of the games, some carries, but not many because we had Lonnie Sadler there, we had Jamie O'Rourke there, we had Adolph Groves there. There were some design plays where I could give them a rest, but it was just that great experience to be now part of that dynamic running back group and being allowed to do that.
Well, I was going to say, Ed, you had record-setting running backs ahead of you.
Absolutely.
Just the fact that you were able to spill them every once in a while, I'm sure was a thrill as an 18, 19-year-old freshman getting to play. No matter how confident of an athlete that you were in your abilities, you had some superstars, veteran superstars ahead of you. So I know that had to have been an awesome experience from an athletic standpoint. How did you keep on an even keel emotionally? How'd you get your head out of the clouds, so to speak? You know, and you're in the dorms and not all the freshmen are getting playing time like you are. Did they give you a hard time? Did they treat you any differently?
No, they did not. I never experienced that. We were all great friends. We were all working hard together. Everyone was looking to have a good experience there at Vanderbilt. But I never once experienced where there was jealousy to that degree with any of the players.
Now, Sloan leaves after the season.
Wow.
Talk about that, because I know you were close to Coach Sloan.
Yeah. Well, we played the bowl game in Atlanta, the Peach Bowl, and it ended, as you said, in a tie. And we were pretty excited about just playing in the first Peach Bowl. I believe it was like in 20 years for the university. I believe that was the number of years that it passed.
I think it's not since the 55 Gator Bowl. That may have been the first bowl team since then.
So we all, on the return trip, listening to the actual radio on a return trip, and I hear that the scores of the Peach Bowl, and then there was an announcement after that is possibility that the coach of Vanderbilt, Coach Sloan, and his staff would now be the coach of the team we just played.
Which was that had to be weird.
And I'm saying in my mind, oh no, that's not going to happen. And sure enough, that did happen, and that was somewhat of a disappointment to lose those coaches that we.
So that was your first indication, was hearing it on the radio.
Yeah, it was right after the game, and we had all gotten dressed, and it was right after the game when everyone was leaving, going their separate ways.
Did Coach Sloan ever address the team?
I can't remember that happened.
I think it's rare.
Yeah.
Particularly in modern times when it's fruit basket turnover with coaches, that they actually address the team.
Well, here's the other part of that. It was during the holidays where we were away from school. So our return from the game was actually destined to our homes. So after that, the coaches obviously went on to their new destination.
And now today, when that happens, half the team transfers.
Yeah.
Look at Oklahoma right now. But we didn't have a transfer portal back then.
Didn't have it, right.
Do you remember discussions amongst your teammates about transferring to Texas Tech or going to a different school? Anything like that?
I don't recall that. And I know, players were obviously disappointed because we were satisfied with the progress that was being made.
Yeah.
But I don't recall what you see today, transfer.
Yeah. Well, did you know Coach Pancoast previously, or was he brand new to the team?
Well, I didn't know Coach Pancoast as such by name, but Memphis is only 70 miles from my hometown.
Right.
And one of the recruiters did come down and talk with me during the time that I was a senior and on my way to Vanderbilt.
So you knew of him.
Yes.
How different, Ed, was it under Coach Pancoast's regime, if you will, versus Coach Sloan and his tenure there?
Well, the difference, I think, was maybe just the philosophy had changed. You know, Coach Sloan had his style and his way of moving it, of progressing the team, and Coach Pancoast also, he had a success. He was successful there in Memphis, and so he wanted to bring in his coaches and his offense and defense. And so you had to get used to the style, whoever the coach was going to be. But there was a difference in how they actually led the team.
Well, you know, the fall of the season of 75, you guys went 7-4.
7-4.
But back then, 7 wins didn't guarantee a bowl like 6 wins does now. I always thought that you guys were a bowl eligible, a bowl team. Do you remember? Because you ended up beating Tennessee that game. You won the last 4 games of the year. Did you guys in your mind think you were going back to a bowl, or by the time the Tennessee game came around, did you already hear or know that you weren't going to a bowl?
No, we were hoping that we were going to a bowl. But I think what may have happened, as I can recall, we lost some games early on.
Yeah.
So the record didn't look very good at mid-year, and then we really turned it on at the end of the year, and won the 4 ball games. But I believe some of those first games we were struggling trying to score touchdowns.
Well, you beat Chattanooga and Rice.
Right.
Lost to Bama, beat Tulane. Then you lost Florida, Georgia, and Mississippi in a row.
Right.
Then you finished with 4 wins over Virginia, Kentucky, Army, and Tennessee.
Absolutely. So we ended up having a good year, 2 good years there, 7 wins both of those years. And then the last 2 years there in the program, we went backwards somewhat.
Yeah, you went 2-9 those 2 years, but your senior year, you were named one of the captains.
Yes.
And as we get a little bit closer toward the end, and I appreciate your time, I want to talk about being a captain and the responsibilities that you may have felt or may have been placed upon you when you, let's see, it was you, Mitch Lilly, Mike Birdsong, and Reggie Calvin, your senior year. How important was that captaincy to you, and what did it mean to you?
Well, it was pretty powerful, simply because the players actually voted in the captains.
Wow.
And we really wanted to end the year on a high note. And I think they voted in the captains because day in and day out, we were working together and led by example. So all of those players that you mentioned, 2 linemen and Reggie, the defensive back, was a really strong defensive back for us. And I was on the offense as the fullback at the time.
Well, it's not only a responsibility during that season, but you're forever now known as a permanent captain of that season, which I think speaks very highly, particularly since it was peer voted, your teammates voted. And I know just the little I know of you and from our conversation, I'm sure you took your role very seriously at that time, and maybe even since. There's been occasions. But I want to step back away from the football experience and now kind of come forward. What has it meant to you over these years to be a Vanderbilt Commodore and to have graduated from Vanderbilt and represent the black and gold?
Wow, that's a powerful question. And I've had the opportunity to travel all over the country just with the jobs that I've had. And the people that I work with, I never hardly mention it, even that I played the sport, but other people know. And when I'm introduced, they say, "Did you know?" And they kind of introduce me that way as part of who I am. And so it is, it's been almost almost 44 years since I left there in 1978. It will be in June. Yeah. And still, I feel the pride of having worn that black and gold. And even when I talk about it, I feel pride. I see that you have that same pride when I've talked with you about the black and gold. We know exactly what those kids are going through day in and day out. They're working their hardest and to do their best. Every Saturday they don the black and gold. And so we're behind them, we're pushing for them because we've been there in their shoes. So nothing but total support for their Commodores.
You know, Ed, and I love that answer. And it's one that's going to stick with me. And I appreciate that because I know from you it's heartfelt. How does the old guys, me and you and our generation, how do we relate to the modern athlete? So, you know, they got social media, they're branding, they got the name, image, and likeness. But a lot of what we went through, as you said a second ago, they're going through the same experiences, just more modern times, better equipment, they're bigger, faster, stronger. But how does the former athletes from decades past relate to the current Commodores? Because there's got to be a common thread in there.
That's an interesting question. The only way I know to relate to anyone is that you have to take time to have conversations with them to get to know them. Mm-hmm. First, for the younger players, maybe have an interest in what experiences we've had as having gone through it. Mm-hmm. And then for the older players to stop and listen to the younger players and the experiences that they are having as they go through it. It's not fun being on the losing side of anything. And so it's an opportunity for us as older players to continue to encourage those younger players. It's that you learn a lesson, you can learn a lesson through any experience that you might have. And I certainly learned a lot of perseverance, integrity, and humility, and all of those types of things that I still stand on today just by the experiences that I've had by going through the process there at Vanderbilt.
I wished I'd have been a teammate with you. Yeah. You would have made me a better person, a better athlete, and I mean that. And Ed, I can't thank you enough for sharing your journey, your stories, and just how you handled yourself over these years. You make the black and gold very proud. Yeah. So thank you for sharing all that tonight.
Well, all I can say is anchor down.
That's right. That's the best thing. Guys, that's why I keep doing these conversations. It's to hear from Ed Parrish and his awesome stories and what he's got to share. And I'm going to keep doing these Tuesday nights. Y'all keep coming back, 7 p.m. Please continue to do what's right for you and your family. Eventually, we're going to pull out of this pandemic. Every time we think we're rounding the corner, something else pops up. But just do the right thing for you and your family. But keep showing up on Tuesday nights. I love these conversations. Y'all have a good night.
Hey, good night. Thank you.